There's been a strong international response to a BBC investigation highlighting the ill treatment of Palestinian medical staff by the Israeli Defense Forces at a hospital in Gaza last month. Our reporting includes evidence of people being detained, beaten and prevented from carrying out vital medical duties. The Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, says the report is very disturbing and he's called for answers from the Israelis. And the US State Department has also seen the investigation. Israel says it took over the Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis last month, believing Hamas fighters were based there. Several Israeli hostages who've been released say they were held on the premises. Israel maintains any abuse of detainees is strictly prohibited. Well, Ola Gearin is live in Jerusalem with the very latest for us now. Ola.
Clive, this was a lengthy, detailed forensic investigation by BBC journalists carried out over several weeks. The details were checked and cross-checked. They spoke to doctors, nurses, pharmacists, people who were displaced and living in the hospital grounds. Now, allegations that emerged were very specific, and those specific allegations were put to the Israeli army. They did not reply to the allegations in specifics. They did not make any denial of the specific allegations of mistreatment, but they told the BBC in general terms that medical staff at Nasser Hospital were not ill-treated during their operation.
Not for the first time in this war, Israeli soldiers have been filmed standing over stripped and kneeling detainees. But these are medical staff detained after the Israeli army overran the Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis. Most are still being held. For weeks, the medics had witnessed Israel's advance as it closed in around the hospital. The fighting in Khan Younis was fierce. Thousands of people who'd sought refuge in the grounds fled under fire. Even a hospital wasn't safe. One nurse was shot inside an operating theatre through a window. Another person shot at the main entrance. The hospital was under siege. Then, on February 15th, after giving warnings, Israeli tanks rolled in. Inside, utter chaos. Patients rushed from collapsing wards. Israel says it found Hamas weapons and medication, which it says supports accounts from Israeli hostages that they were held here. In the IDF's own footage, you can see hospital patients detained outside in their beds and wheelchairs with their hands zip-tied. And this was the treatment for medical staff. At least 49 of them forced to leave their posts and remove their surgical clothing. Israel says it was searching for concealed weapons and that among the 200 arrested at Nasser were terrorists posing as medics. Dr. Amira Asuli had remained at Nasser throughout the siege. Before Israel's incursion, she risked her life to save others as people were shot inside the grounds. Later, she witnessed what happened to her fellow doctors.
It was tough for us to see how the doctors, who'd bravely stayed at the hospital despite the dangers, were stripped and beaten. Their hands were tied behind them and they were left in the sun for hours.
Dr. Ahmed Sabha is one of very few medics to have since been released. He shows the positions they were forced to adopt for hours and says they were also tortured. His hand was broken by an Israeli soldier, he says, and muzzled dogs were set on him.
They forced us to kneel down with our eyes blindfolded. There was a pit in the ground, and we thought they would execute us and bury us there. We said our prayers, but they were just intimidating us.
The hospital manager, who dealt with the Israelis during the raid, says with so many staff detained, patients died.
8 doctors and 15 nurses were left treating 250 patients. You can imagine the level of care we could give with no water or electricity in the hospital at that point. During this time, 13 patients and injured people died.
Israel says any abuse of detainees is against IDF orders and is strictly prohibited. The BBC investigation into how Israeli troops treated staff and patients at Nasser Hospital was raised today in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The Foreign Secretary now calling for answers.
These are very disturbing pictures and reports that have come out from this hospital, and we need to get to the bottom of what exactly happened, and we need answers from the Israelis about that. And when we have those, then it'll be easier to comment.
In Washington, too, questions are being asked about the BBC investigation.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Has the US raised it with Israel?
I have only seen the report. I don't know that if we have raised it, but I would expect that we would. It is the type of cases that we often raise with them to seek more information and to make clear, as we always have, that any detainee should be treated in strict compliance with international humanitarian law.
The Israeli army says it operated within Nasser in a precise and focused manner, and it provided equipment enabling the hospital to function and treat patients. But with the war continuing and more than 40 medics still detained or missing, the hospital has been closed for weeks.
And Lord Cameron, he says he wants answers from the Israeli government. What are the chances of him getting what he's asking for?
Well, we've been trying to get some answers ourselves tonight, Clive, after that call by Lord Cameron. We contacted the Foreign Ministry and the Prime Minister's office. They had nothing to say. The Prime Minister's office referred us back to the army. I think we have to look at how Israel has responded in the last 5 months to its closest ally, the United States. We've had President Biden as far back as December criticising indiscriminate bombing. At the weekend, he has spoken again about a disregard for the loss of innocent lives. Now, Israel has not changed the conduct of the war in response to those remarks, and I think if it's not listening to the White House, there is less chance that it will listen to London. The Foreign Office is saying it wants accountability and transparency. Well, Amnesty International said today that ministers are being naive or disingenuous if they think that the Israeli army can credibly investigate itself. And critics would say, look, over the last 5 months, there have been 30,000 plus Palestinians killed in Gaza, the vast majority of whom are women and children, many killed in broad daylight, many crushed to death in the rubble of their own homes. And there has been no transparency or accountability for any of that so far.
OK, Orla, thank you for that. Orla Gearin there, our senior international correspondent in Jerusalem. And you can read more about the BBC's investigation into events at Nasser Hospital from our senior journalist, Alice Cuddy. That's on the BBC website.